You're confident in meetings, polite with strangers, funny on social media, supportive with friends. But which one is the real you? Or is that even the right question? What if you've become so good at playing your role in society that you've forgotten who you actually are underneath the performance? What if we're not authentic people trying to be seen, but performers trying to survive on a stage we never chose? This isn't just poetic musing. Thinkers like Carl Jung and Erving Goffman have been warning us for decades. We all wear masks, social masks, and most of us don't even realize it. Jung called it the persona. Goffman compared life to theater. Both suggested that modern life isn't about being, it's about acting. In this video, we're peeling back the layers, not to expose some magical true self, but to ask, what happens when the mask becomes more real than the face beneath it? And if your identity is just a performance, are you even the one writing the script? Carl Jung's persona, the mask you forgot you're wearing. According to Carl Jung, the persona is not who you are, it's who you perform. It's the mask you put on every time you enter a room. The version of yourself you tailor to be accepted, respected, understood, or simply left alone. You might call it professionalism, or maturity, or being normal. But underneath all those polite euphemisms is the same thing, a psychological costume worn to meet the expectations of others. And here's the twist, most of us have worn it for so long, we've forgotten it's a costume at all. Jung didn't hate the persona. In fact, he saw it as necessary. You can't walk around society raw and unfiltered, announcing your deepest fears in the grocery line, or bringing your full existential dread to team meetings. The mask keeps things running. It makes social life possible. But the danger begins when you start mistaking the mask for the face beneath it. When your public self becomes so dominant, so rehearsed, that your private self quietly dissolves behind it. We're taught to curate from an early age. Be polite, be likable, don't cry here, don't laugh too loud there. By adulthood, we've assembled a personality kit we carry into different contexts. Confident at work, quiet with family, witty on dates. Each version real enough to function, but distant enough to protect. We shapeshift not because we're dishonest, but because we've learned that adaptation is survival. But when adaptation becomes the only mode, we lose access to something deeper. Jung warned that over-identifying with the persona leads to psychological emptiness. You may appear successful, balanced, even admired, but inside you feel vague, disconnected, unreal. Like you're always on, but never fully here. It's a quiet kind of suffering, one you can't post about. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. You've mastered the part, but the actor is exhausted. This is how people lose touch with themselves, not through trauma or tragedy, but through the slow erosion of authenticity. You wake up one day and realize you've been living a version of your life that works for others but not from you. You know how to meet expectations. You don't know what you expect from yourself anymore. The persona isn't just social, it's protective. It shields you from rejection, from vulnerability, from the awkward silence that comes when you say something real and no one knows how to respond. But the cost of that protection is intimacy, with others and with yourself. You can't connect deeply while performing constantly, and eventually the mask gets heavy. Jung believed that true individuation, becoming whole, requires confronting the persona, not destroying it, but seeing it clearly, naming it, questioning when it helps and when it hides. It means asking, who am I when I'm not trying to impress, please, or perform? What part of me have I exiled because it doesn't fit the character I've created? These questions aren't comfortable, but they're necessary. Because the self is not a brand, it's not a strategy, it's not a carefully filtered personality. The self is messy, contradictory, deep, and often inconvenient, but it's also real. And in a world obsessed with image, reality is revolutionary. So Jung's persona isn't your enemy. It's just not your whole story. It's the mask you wear so you can function. But you owe it to yourself to know what lies beneath. Because the longer you live inside the mask, the more you forget there's a face behind it. And that face, however flawed or quiet or strange, it's yours. And it's waiting. Goffman's social theater. Life as a series of roles. If Carl Jung gave us the mask, Erving Goffman gave us the whole stage. According to Goffman, life isn't just full of roles. We are always in a role. You don't just have a social mask. You have a script, a costume, a setting, and an audience. It's all theater. And no, not in a Shakespearean poetic sense, in a very literal, awkward, everyday kind of way. When you smile at your boss, you're performing. When you ask a stranger how they're doing, without caring about the answer, you're performing. Even your online presence? That's your digital monologue. Welcome to Goffman's dramaturgical model of life. You're always on stage, and the show never ends. In his book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, Goffman argued that all of us manage impressions the way actors manage their performance. We have front stage behavior, what we show the world, and backstage behavior, what we hide. You might be charismatic and controlled at the office, but collapse into a heap of existential dread when you get home. And that's not fake. It's just theater, socially necessary, predictable, rehearsed. The problem isn't that we perform, it's that the role can become more real than the actor. Every role comes with expectations. You act differently as a student, a parent, a friend, a lover. Society gives you a rough script, and you improvise within it. But slowly you might start confusing the role with your identity. You're not just playing the good employee, you become it. You lose your sense of self outside the character. Because who are you when you're not being watched, when the applause stops, when there's no one left to impress? Goffman wasn't trying to be cynical. He didn't think people were inauthentic or manipulative. He thought they were human. And humans are social creatures. We need structure. We crave connection. So we perform roles to navigate life. But the danger comes when we forget we're performing at all, when the costume sticks to our skin and the mask becomes permanent. Social media made Goffman more relevant than ever. Now the stage isn't just public. It's always on. You're curating your persona in real time every time you post, like, or caption. You don't just perform for your coworkers. You perform for your followers, your brand, your algorithm. You're not just on at work. You're on while you rest, while you cook, while you heal. The backstage shrinks. The curtain never drops. And when life becomes an endless presentation, you start to live for the gaze of others. You measure your worth in likes, in compliments, in how convincingly you played your part. And that can be exhausting. Not because people are watching, but because you're always watching yourself being watched. It's a strange form of self-alienation. You don't even know what feels real anymore, only what looks convincing. Goffman's brilliance was in showing us the structure without condemning it. He didn't say stop acting, he said, know that you are. Because awareness changes everything. Once you realize you're in a role, you can choose how much of yourself to bring to it. You can shift, improvise, step off stage now and then. You can stop chasing the perfect performance and start looking for moments of honest presence. Because the problem isn't that we play roles. The problem is when the role starts playing us. When our lives are so choreographed that spontaneity becomes terrifying. When we can't tell if we're smiling because we're happy or because we're expected to be. So maybe Goffman isn't asking us to stop performing. Maybe he's asking us to pause, to take a breath between scenes, to remember that beneath the character is a person. Flawed, changing, messy, and maybe, just maybe, that person deserves a little more time off stage. The inner conflict, when the real self goes silent. You wake up, you play the role, you dress the part, smile on command, say what's expected, do what's appropriate, and somewhere between your morning coffee and your evening scroll, you start to wonder, where did I go? Not the curated version of you, not the responsible one, the charming one, the efficient one, but the you that exists when no one is grading, liking, or approving. The one that doesn't need a script, the one that just is. And here's the uncomfortable truth. For many of us, that version has gone quiet. Not gone forever, just quiet. Because in a world that constantly demands performance, authenticity often becomes inconvenient. Carl Jung called this the crisis of individuation. The tension between the persona, the social mask, and the true self, the deep inner reality that doesn't care about applause. And the more energy you invest in being what others expect, the less space there is for what you actually are. You begin to drift, not dramatically, not tragically, but slowly, subtly, until one day you realize you're living a life that's technically yours, but doesn't feel like it. The inner self doesn't scream, it doesn't send notifications, it whispers. And when you don't listen, it stops speaking. Not out of spite, out of fatigue. And in that silence, something hollow grows. You go through the motions, say the right things, hit the milestones, but it all feels flat. Not because anything is wrong on the outside, but because you're no longer home on the inside. This is the moment where many people start to feel off, disconnected, restless. They can't quite explain it. They've done everything right. They've been everything they were supposed to be. And yet, there's this quiet ache, a kind of internal homelessness. And the usual fixes, more productivity, more validation, more distractions, don't work. Because the ache isn't about what's missing externally, it's about what's been buried internally. The real self doesn't die, but it can retreat. And every time you silence a gut instinct to keep the peace, or suppress a weird idea to sound smart, or abandon a creative urge because it doesn't fit your brand, you reinforce the exile. You tell that part of you, not now, not here, not useful. And after a while, that part believes you. The inner conflict grows from this split between the self that plays the game and the self that doesn't want to play at all. Between what is expressed and what is true. And when the gap gets wide enough, you start living in a permanent performance, unsure where the role ends and the real begins. But here's the key. The solution isn't to destroy the persona. That would just be another performance, this time of radical authenticity, which is still ironically an identity to maintain. The real work is in integration, in letting the real self speak again, not louder than the persona, but alongside it. In creating space for thoughts that don't need to be liked, for feelings that don't need to be justified, for silence that doesn't need to be productive. Because authenticity isn't a brand, it's a practice, a quiet, ongoing commitment to staying close to yourself, even when it's awkward, even when it doesn't fit the scene. And slowly, the inner self starts speaking again. Not to perform, just to exist. And in that existence, something beautiful returns. Presence. So the next time you feel that strange distance from your life, don't rush to fill it. Sit with it. Listen. The self you've silenced may still be there, waiting not for a spotlight, but for a little honest attention. Modern identity crisis. Filters, followers, and the performed life. There was a time when identity was shaped slowly, through conversations, failures, seasons of silence. Now identity is shaped by pixels. You don't just live your life, you post it. And with every post comes a choice. What version of you are you showing? What mood are you selling? What story are you branding as real? In the age of social media, the performance doesn't end when you leave the room. It continues in your pocket, on your feed, in the invisible eyes of people you may never meet. This is where the modern identity crisis takes root, not in some dramatic collapse of personality, but in the slow erosion of self beneath curated content and social comparison. You don't just ask, "Who am I?" anymore. You ask, "Who should I be online?" The pressure isn't just to be someone, it's to be someone others find engaging. Authentic, but polished. Vulnerable, but photogenic. Deep, but digestible. You're not just managing your image, you're managing your meaning. And it's exhausting, because the more you perform a version of yourself, the more you start confusing the performance with reality. You tweak your language, your face, your life, just enough to make it post-worthy. And eventually you begin to wonder, do I feel this or am I performing the feeling? Do I like this or do I just know it'll get a reaction? You start living for the reaction. The comment section becomes your mirror. Validation becomes your compass. And underneath it all, a question lingers. What if I've built a persona people love, but it's not actually me? This isn't just narcissism, it's survival. We've been taught that visibility is value, that if it isn't seen, it doesn't count, that quiet equals irrelevant. So we become louder, sharper, faster, more optimized. We filter not just our photos, but our entire presence. We don't just edit images, we edit identity, until the person behind the edits becomes blurry, even to us. And here's the irony. We call it sharing, but most of the time, we're hiding. Behind humor, behind beauty, behind success. We're not showing our true selves. We're uploading our acceptable selves. The ones that won't scare people. The ones that get likes. And slowly we begin to fear the parts of us that don't fit the feed. The algorithm rewards engagement, not honesty. So we learn to perform sadness in a way that's comforting, rage in a way that's marketable, joy in a way that's photogenic. It's not that we're lying, it's that we're constantly translating ourselves into something more palatable. and every translation leaves something out. What makes this dangerous isn't just the loss of self, it's the pressure to keep up the performance forever. You become afraid to change, to contradict yourself, to grow in directions that confuse your audience. You're no longer a person. You're a character in a show you didn't know you were filming. And quitting isn't an option, because the identity you've built is now the one paying your bills. So where do you go from here? Maybe it starts with reclaiming moments that aren't performative, laughing without recording, crying without explaining, creating without sharing. Not because those things are bad, but because the self needs a space where it's not being watched, where it doesn't have to earn its existence with engagement, because identity isn't meant to be content, it's meant to be lived, awkwardly, quietly, privately. Not everything has to be witnessed to be real. Not every part of you needs a filter or a caption or a crowd. Some of the truest things about you will never trend. And that's not failure, that's freedom. Reclaiming the self, can we live without a mask? Let's begin with a hard truth. We all wear masks, not metaphorical ones in a poetic sense, but actual psychological adaptations, personas, roles, curated identities that help us get through the day. They allow us to function, to connect, to not completely collapse under the weight of social expectation. So when we talk about taking off the mask, it's not a call for total exposure. It's not about screaming your raw emotions in a board meeting or refusing small talk at dinner parties. It's about something far more delicate and more radical. It's about remembering that the mask exists in the first place. Reclaiming the self isn't a loud act. It's not a dramatic unmasking in front of a crowd shouting, "This is the real me," before storming off into the sunset. That too is theater, just wearing a different costume. The real work is quieter, slower, and often uncomfortable. It begins with noticing. When you say "I'm fine" while something inside you isn't. When you laugh to fit in, even though you didn't find the joke funny. When you dress, speak, behave, not because it's you, but because it's expected. These aren't crimes, they're survival tactics. But each one is a nudge, a gentle reminder that the line between performance and person is thinning. The truth is, we've been taught to confuse adaptation with authenticity. The better you fit in, the more you're rewarded. Praise, attention, approval, they're all tied to how well you play the game. And after a while, it's easy to mistake the game for life itself. But deep down, you know when something feels off, when the compliments feel like they're landing on someone else, when your success doesn't satisfy, when your curated identity feels like a stranger you're now obligated to become. This is the moment when the question arises, can I live without the mask? Not functionally. Social roles are necessary, but existentially. Can I stop confusing the role I play with the self I am? Can I make room for the parts of me that don't fit neatly into my job title, my relationship, my social media profile? Because reclaiming the self doesn't mean rejecting the world. It means engaging it without abandoning your center. And here's where things get tricky. Because the mask doesn't just protect you, it defines you. It's what people recognize. It's how they understand you. It's what makes you reliable, successful, put together. Removing it, even a little, can make others uncomfortable. You'll be told you've changed or aren't yourself lately, when in fact you're becoming more yourself than you've ever been. But their discomfort is not your failure. It's just proof of how invested they were in the version of you they liked best. The question isn't, can I live without a mask? It's, can I live knowing the mask isn't me? Because there's a kind of freedom in that awareness. You don't need to destroy the persona. You just need to soften it, to let it loosen at the edges, to allow moments where the real self, the awkward, curious, messy, contradictory self, gets to breathe. This doesn't mean turning your life into a rebellion against all social norms. That's just another costume, this time called authenticity. The goal isn't to be brutally honest in all situations or to reject every role. The goal is choice, consciousness, fluidity. To know when you're stepping into a role and to be able to step out when it no longer serves you. To navigate life with both presence and perspective. Carl Jung didn't say burn the persona. He said integrate it. Own it without being owned by it. Let it be one voice in the choir, not the only one allowed to sing. And that's what reclaiming the self looks like. Not a grand declaration, but a quiet, continuous return to what feels real, even if it's inconvenient. Even if it doesn't get applause, it starts small. A journal entry you don't share. A moment of silence instead of a forced smile. Telling someone I don't know when you really don't. Saying no when you mean it. Laughing at something stupid because you actually found it funny, not because it fit your aesthetic. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And it builds. Slowly, you create a life with more truth in it. More breath. More you. In a world that rewards performance, being yourself is a quiet form of rebellion. And it doesn't mean you have to be transparent all the time. It means you don't have to betray yourself in the name of fitting in. That you can hold the tension between being socially appropriate and personally honest. That you can navigate your roles without losing your reflection in them. We often think of freedom as external, escaping jobs, breaking rules, moving to Bali. But the deeper freedom is internal. It's the freedom to exist without constant self-editing. To know that who you are beneath the role, behind the mask, is not a liability, but a life source. And the more you live from that place, the more your external life begins to reflect your internal reality. Not all at once, not perfectly, but undeniably. So can you live without a mask? Maybe not always. But can you live with the awareness that the mask isn't you? Absolutely. And from that awareness, you can choose something rare in a world of performers. Presence. You can let your identity be something alive, not something static. Something shaped by real experiences, not just curated optics. You can move through life not as a brand, but as a being. And in doing so, you don't just reclaim yourself. You make space for others to do the same. Because when one person stops performing, it gives the whole room permission to breathe. And maybe, just maybe, that's the start of something real. Not just in you, but in all of us. Maybe the goal isn't to rip off the mask dramatically. Maybe it's just to notice that you're wearing one. To observe the shift in your voice, your posture, your words, depending on who's in the room. Maybe it's about learning to sit with that discomfort instead of running from it. The truth is, we're all performing. But the danger isn't in the performance, it's in forgetting that it is one. When you confuse your costume for your core, you lose touch with the strange, honest, unpolished self that exists underneath. But if you can pause even briefly and say, this version of me is just one version, then you open the door. And behind that door isn't perfection. It's something better, freedom, not from society, but from the need to be perfectly understood by it. If this video held up a mirror to the roles you didn't know you were playing, good. That's where the work begins. Drop a comment below. What's one mask you're tired of wearing? And what's one part of you that rarely gets to speak? Subscribe for more quietly uncomfortable explorations of self, society, and the space in between. And if this resonated, share it. Because maybe the first step to being more human is realizing we're not alone in pretending.